CBS.
Well, good morning and welcome to CBS News Mornings. It's just about 7 o'clock here in New York City. I'm Anne-Marie Green, and here's a look at the stories grabbing our attention right now. Efforts to flee eastern Ukraine are ramping up this morning after President Zelensky's weekend warning about Russian troops escalating attacks in the region. So we're going to have team coverage on what this could mean for the next phase of the war. President Biden is expected to announce new regulations on untraceable ghost guns as early as this morning. We're going to have all the details and take a closer look at who's being tapped to lead the ATF. Plus, Emmanuel Macron is set to face far-right candidate Marine Le Pen in the French presidential election runoff. We're going to tell you why insiders believe the race may be tighter than expected. As U.S. airlines push for an end to coronavirus mandates, we're tracking fallout from overseas airlines after several decided to ditch mask requirements. Our Money Watch team shares potential lessons that could be learned here in the U.S. And despite being the social media company's biggest shareholder, Elon Musk has rejected an offer to join Twitter's board. We're tracking the impact of that news on company shares. But we have a lot of news to get to in this next hour. And of course, we are going to start with Ukraine. President Zelensky has been the face of the fierce resistance against the Russian invasion. 60 Minutes' Scott Pelley got rare access into his underground fortress in Kyiv and spoke one-on-one with the man standing in the way of Vladimir Putin's military advance.
To meet the man who stands between the Russian army and the free world.
We met President
Zelensky in the blacked-out hallways of his command center in Ukraine's capital, Kyiv. It is a fortress crowded with troops, machine guns, mines, explosives, and a great deal more.
Are you safe here?
Yeah, I'm fine, he told us. I feel pretty calm about it. Our guards are worried because there could be an airstrike. But when we get the air raid evacuation signal, we head downstairs.
Mr. President, what has it been like working under these conditions?
We found a way how to work. We don't have another way.
You found a way how to work? You don't have any other way?
Slipping back into Ukrainian, he said, "It has to be dark in here. You can't switch the lights on because a bomb could just fly in during an airstrike."
You have troops sleeping.
The president and his staff have lived here for 46 days now. The Russian invasion plan expected Kyiv to fall in 3 days, but that relied on one assumption, that Zelensky would run. When everyone is telling you you need to go, you need to think. Before I do something, I analyze the situation. I've always done it calmly, without any chaos. I might not be the strongest warrior, but I'm not willing to betray anyone.
What did you tell your wife and children about your decision?
I told them this is my choice, and I can't do it any other way. I'm the president of my country. I'm the president of our people. And even if I wasn't president, I would have stayed here. My family understood, not only understood, but fully supported my decision. Fully. It was the decision that saved Ukraine from immediate collapse. Good evening, everyone, he said. We are all here. Our soldiers are here. The citizens of the country are here. We are all here protecting our independence, our country, and we're going to continue.
You had made a decision to give your life for your country, if it came to that.
I don't want to make myself out to be a hero, he said. I love my family. I want to live many more years. But choosing between running or being with my people, of course I'm ready to give my life for my country.
So no surprise, that interview is the most clicked on story on CBSNews.com right now. And what you heard there was just a part of the conversation. To see Scott's full interview with Zelensky, stream 60 Minutes tomorrow night right here at 8 Eastern. So new images have emerged of Russian troops making their way to Ukraine's Donbass region after failing to take Kyiv. Ukraine's president says more support is needed from the U.S. to help hold off Moscow. Naomi Ruckham reports.
Ukraine is preparing for a robust Russian offensive in the east.
Everybody a bit scared. That's normal. That's war.
New satellite images show an 8-mile convoy of Russian military vehicles headed to the Donbass region. Ukrainian army volunteers are digging in and short on weapons, fixing this abandoned Russian tank they hope to use. After a missile hit this train station on Friday, killing more than 50 people, some towns have emptied out as civilians flee the violence.
The fightings are becoming heavier and heavier, but we will fight till the death.
Noting the success of Ukrainian forces in the north,
the Ukrainians won the Battle of Kyiv.
National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan told CBS's Face the Nation the U.S. and its allies will keep providing weapons.
Some of that's been delivered, some of it's on the way, and some of it we're still working to source.
Speaking to 60 Minutes correspondent Scott Pelley, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says he is grateful for President Biden's support, and his country's survival depends on it continuing.
President Biden can enter history as the person who stood shoulder to shoulder with the Ukrainian people.
A new CBS News YouGov poll found 72% of Americans support sending weapons and supplies to Ukraine.
All right, we're going to take you to Kyiv now, where Anna Foster is standing by with our partner at the BBC. Thank you so much for joining us. So you've heard President Zelensky. One of the things that he said over the weekend was that we are entering a new phase of this war, that the expectation is that there will be a renewed focus on eastern Ukraine with a ramping up of weaponry. I'm wondering if that's what you're seeing in Kyiv. Have you seen the Russians pull back from Kyiv? Is there less artillery, less of pretty much everything?
There is, Anne-Marie. I think there's a real feeling that this conflict is now about to become really focused on the east of this country. You have to remember, of course, that in the 6 weeks of this war so far, Russia has been depleted. It has lost troops, it has lost weaponry, it has lost armoured vehicles, but it still wants to try and salvage what it can out of this conflict. And it knows that for now, what it needs to do is pull back to the east, to the Donbass region, those Russian-speaking areas, separatist areas of Luhansk and Donetsk. And there's a real feeling that the focus now is moving in that direction, away from places like Kyiv, of course. This was, for so long, the place that Russia really wanted to try and take. They wanted to try and take the capital and show their military might. They didn't manage to do that, but they really want to try and salvage something in the east.
Is there a concern, though, that if they are successful in the east and they manage to sort of hammer out a stronghold there, an area where they can get supplies in and out very quickly, there will be a renewed focus on Kyiv, a second kick at the can, if you will?
I think that's right. And that is really interesting because, you know, what I've seen today, I'm on the edge of Irpin, which is one of those commuter towns around the capital, Kyiv, which was held by Russian forces. And people are starting to come back here because they're desperate to return home. They've fled their homes in the midst of the conflict and they want to come back. But there is a concern that Kyiv could still be a target in the future. The Chechen leader just overnight said that he felt that if Russia took the Donbass, then they would move on again and try to take Kyiv. We have to remember, of course, the resistance that they faced when they tried to do that the first time. It would be very difficult for them to try again. But the messaging is, the psychological messaging is that they still want to try.
It's interesting that you're sort of just on the outskirts of Kyiv. We heard about the horrors that were revealed in Bucha, in Irpin, once the Russians left. I'm really sort of curious about the fact that people want to come back to these areas right now.
It's really surprising, isn't it? And you know, to get here today, there's been a huge traffic jam of people, some of them who are waiting to get back to their homes, some of them who are bringing food and aid. It is taking them hours to get through these checkpoints. You see people with their cars parked up at the side of the road, smoking a cigarette, just patiently waiting to get back and to see, well, I was going to say to see their homes, but in some cases it is to see what's left of their homes. And if you just see behind me here, this is just a small fraction of the devastation that we have witnessed. These cars, and you can see there are family cars mixed in with military vehicles. These were all on the road down to the bridge here that people used to try and get out of Irpin, the bridge that was eventually blown up by Ukrainian forces to try and stop the Russians from getting in here. But you imagine those cars, the people inside fleeing for their lives, and you look now at this twisted, tangled mountain of wreckage, and it is just one image in an area that has seen so much destruction, Anne-Marie, in these last 6 weeks or so.
It is such a reminder that people just want to go home. They want to come back to Ukraine. It doesn't matter what home looks like right now, but home is where the heart always is. Anna, thank you very much. The Biden administration is cracking down on so-called ghost guns, with the president gearing up for a major announcement later on today. The privately made guns do not have serial numbers and are increasingly being found at crime scenes across the U.S. Yesterday, Majority Leader Chuck Schumer pushed for the administration to take immediate action to help New York City combat a wave of gun violence.
There's no serial number. There's no background check. And you can order them online, no questions asked. Here, in this hand, is one of the online ads. You can be a 5-year-old and buy the pieces of a gun and put it together. That is too much.
Well, the White House and Justice Department are under growing pressure to deal with gun-related deaths and violent crime nationwide. The government says that it has found, quote, more and scarier information about 2 men who allegedly posed as Homeland Security employees for years. Court papers claim that one of the suspects was tipped off about the arrest, and the men tried to conceal evidence by shipping firearms cases and ammunition out of their apartment to a Secret Service agent assigned to protect the White House. Prosecutors are expected back in court this morning to try and have the men stay in jail until they go to trial. And turning now to the coronavirus, parts of the U.S. are seeing a spike in cases just as mandates and other restrictions are being relaxed. Jonathan Vigliotti has more from Los Angeles.
Spring break crowds and eased masking restrictions in Los Angeles and other cities are driving COVID risks up across the nation.
We're rushing a little too much into it to go back to normal.
In the Northeast, there's been a spike in cases, including the nation's capital, where new infections jumped 89% in 2 weeks, including a high-profile outbreak among lawmakers. Health officials say the BA2 subvariant accounts for up to 72% of cases, but says its milder symptoms, paired with the closing of many testing sites, could lead to underreporting.
I think that we're dramatically undercounting cases. So if you see cases going up in your local community, that's a pretty good indication that there's more infection in what we're measuring.
In New York City, Mayor Eric Adams is now in isolation after testing positive for COVID. CBS's Elise Preston is near Times Square.
Here on Broadway, the marquee stars of Plaza Suite tested positive for COVID, making it the 3rd production to temporarily shut down because of new infections.
Macbeth is on the hit list. I wanted to go and see it.
Richard Drysdale's seen nearly 24 performances since the Great White Way reopened last fall. But this weekend, he's opting for a concert.
Is this the new normal?
I think it's a new normal. I think it'll keep changing as the pandemic changes.
In Los Angeles and throughout the state, many Californians support the lifted mandates, but are also acting with caution.
It's not over yet, so I'm continuing to wear my mask.
Jonathan Vigliotti, CBS News, Los Angeles.
The Ukraine war is entering a new destructive stage as Russia targets the eastern part of the country. Holly Williams is live on the ground following the latest, and we will hear from her after the break. Plus, an extremely high-stakes election is underway in France, where Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen are in the midst of a major showdown. We're going to have all the latest details on that coming up. But first, it is 7:15 on the East Coast, 7:13 on the East Coast. Time to check your local weather.
an original CBS Reports documentary.
Some Republicans are now accusing companies like Twitter and Facebook of targeting conservatives.
They've had unchecked power to censor.
I do not have access to my main Facebook account.
I wasn't given an explanation. I was just like, what did I do?
It's not okay to shut down my voice simply because it's not the same as yours.
How those rules are enforced is something that the rest of us know very, very little about.
The First Amendment protects all of us from the government limiting our speech. The companies have the ability to decide what speech they will allow. They're not the government.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
Oh my God, the truck is sinking.
Devastating flooding has reached catastrophic levels.
Rising sea levels are threatening America's coasts.
You would have to take that house and put it on stilts 10 feet tall. If the street is filled with salt water, what difference does it make how high you make your house?
The highest rental rates is exactly where the elevation is highest.
This was the evidence to prove that carbon gentrification was real.
Pay $1,800 in 5 days or you have to leave. Were you scared?
Yes.
Every single person who stood up and said, I am not paying this rent increase, received an eviction.
Haitians built this place and you're getting kicked out.
Yes.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yeah. We found it.
You're kidding me!
We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
The COVID economic shutdown hit Las Vegas harder than any other major city in the nation.
It's decimated the entertainment community.
So even though it looks fairly busy, this is really just a fraction of what business was like prior to COVID.
Last week, there was another large hotel chain that 18,000 were let go.
I haven't seen any jobs that are even close to what I was making.
We're trying to keep things as normal for our kids. I have a 16-year-old daughter and a 12-year-old son.
And I see every day people losing their homes, having to leave Las Vegas.
If I have to start over somewhere else, I have to start over.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
It is 4:17 a.m. in Las Vegas. Things are just getting started in Las Vegas around this time, right? Maybe. Did you know that the city has more than 150,000 hotel rooms? And before the pandemic, it hosted at least 300 weddings a day. Meantime, it is 7:17 here in New York City. CBS News Mornings is back with a look at some of the stories that you may have missed while you were offline. The vice chair of the House committee investigating the January 6th attack says lawmakers have enough evidence to refer former President Trump for criminal charges. In a CNN interview yesterday, Congresswoman Liz Cheney said the panel has not decided whether it will move on that referral. And a power shift is underway in Pakistan. Lawmakers removed Prime Minister Imran Khan with a no confidence vote over the weekend. Parliament is set to elect a new leader today. China is blocking most travelers from entering the major city of Guangzhou amid a COVID case surge. Meanwhile, Shanghai, about 26 million people there are still on lockdown. They're being forced to rely on delivery services for basic necessities. Widespread food shortages have been reported. New CBS News polling shows that Americans strongly support Ukraine and intensifying sanctions against Russia. 72% of people back sending weapons to Ukraine, and 78% want to keep economic sanctions in place to punish Moscow. Meanwhile, 55% of Americans say they disapprove of President Biden's handling of the conflict. Civilians in eastern Ukraine are preparing for the worst as Moscow shifts its attention back to that region. And this comes as the death toll from last week's Russian attack on a train station has risen to at least 57 people. Meanwhile, a new general has been appointed to lead Russian troops. So Holly Williams is covering all of this for us, and she is joining us now this morning. Holly, good morning.
Good morning, Anne-Marie. We've been reporting on alleged war crimes carried out by Russian troops during this invasion, but experts say their campaign has also been marked by ineptitude and a lack of professionalism. Now it seems Moscow is trying to fix that problem.
General Alexander Dvornikov is the man who's now in charge of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, according to a US official. General Dvornikov previously led Russian forces in Syria, where Russia's been accused of committing war crimes by the United Nations, with airstrikes targeting civilian areas. General Dvornikov's appointment follows a catalogue of Russian military failures. Russian forces were defeated in the battle for Kyiv and have withdrawn from around Ukraine's capital. The security situation's now so improved. On Saturday, President Volodymyr Zelensky walked through the city centre with British Prime Minister Boris Johnson.
We simply wish to keep supporting the people of Ukraine for as long as it takes.
Ukraine claims nearly 20,000 Russian troops have been killed in this invasion, while Russia's tanks and armoured vehicles have been picked off by Ukrainians, sometimes using guerrilla tactics. We've seen their burnt-out carcasses across this country.
Six of them died here.
Russia's now switching its focus to eastern Ukraine. This column of vehicles, at least 8 miles long, was spotted heading there 3 days ago.
Okay. President Zelensky said today that tens of thousands of Ukrainians are thought to have been killed in the city of Mariupol, which has been bombarded by Russian forces for weeks on end. Anne-Marie.
So, Holly, there's growing concern that the military buildup near Kharkiv will pose an additional humanitarian threat. The good news is there are more humanitarian corridors that are opening up. Do we know where they're going to be located? And, and in light of a train station being attacked, do we expect them to be open for long, and will they be safe?
Well, Anne-Marie, we do have some details. The Ukrainians are saying that they've agreed 9 humanitarian corridors today from various cities in the east, but they say that people will have to use their own private transport. That is, they'll have to make their way out under their own steam. Some of the cities where those corridors are connected to include Mariupol, which we just mentioned. It's been bombarded ferociously for weeks, but also other places, Berdyansk, Energodar, Bakhmut, a city in the east, where very close to the front line, where we've spent a lot of time, actually. The Ukrainians say that yesterday nearly 3,000 people managed to make it out of those eastern areas, but obviously that is a tiny fraction of the thousands of people who would like to leave. The Ukrainians are also saying that buses that went to try to evacuate people from those regions were stopped at a Russian checkpoint, and we don't know ultimately what happened there. The other thing I would add is that we drove through central Ukraine on Saturday heading from west to east, and we saw quite long lines of cars heading in the opposite direction, east to west, and we assumed that a lot of those people were fleeing their homes in the east.
So the Russians are pivoting back to the Donbass region, an area that, frankly, there had been military action there for years before this war. Why is this area so important to Putin?
Well, so parts of eastern Ukraine are actually breakaway regions controlled by Russian-backed separatists. As you say, they've been fighting a war against the Ukrainian military since 2014. Vladimir Putin has made unfounded claims that genocide is being committed against native Russian speakers in those areas. And in fact, that was part of his justification for this invasion. Strategically, there's speculation, and it's just speculation, that what Russia would like to do is to expand those areas under the control of the separatists, but also Russia at this point, and then connect them with Crimea in the south, which Russia annexed, Russia seized control of back in 2014. That, would help explain the bombardment, the ferocious bombardment of the city of Mariupol. And if the Russians are successful, then essentially what Russia will do is connect those two regions and deprive Ukraine of a big slice of its coastline.
And you got to wonder, is that something that Ukraine is willing to accept? Should that be the move? And will Russia just stop there? Many questions. Holly, thank you very much. Well, the stage is set for a presidential runoff election in France after no candidate won outright in the first round of voting over the weekend. Elaine Cobb is following this for us. Elaine, good morning.
Good morning, Anne-Marie. French President Emmanuel Macron will have his work cut out for him over the next 2 weeks if he is to keep his job. He came in more than 4 points ahead of far-right in yesterday's round, but the fight is far from over. With almost 28% of the vote, Macron topped the list of 12 candidates in that first round. But the man who promised 5 years ago of extremism has clearly failed in that. A third of voters chose a far-right candidate. 82% voted far left, as the traditional left and conservative candidates were left trailing. The challenge for Macron now is to unite the left and centre-left behind him for the second round runoff on April 24th. He was largely absent during the campaign, busy with shuttle diplomacy on Ukraine. So he needs to show that he understands people's main concerns during this election are around the economy. Most of yesterday's losers have called on their supporters to block Marine Le Pen, but that doesn't mean they'll vote for Macron. Many of those who joined him 5 years ago to block her feel he hasn't done enough to guarantee their jobs or their purchasing power, and they may simply abstain.
Interesting. Marine Le Pen has really worked to sort of soften her image during this campaign. But I wonder, so she's talking about the economy instead of immigration or other issues that are typical for far-right candidates. She's softened her image, but what about her policies? Do they remain far-right?
Le Pen toned down her extremist rhetoric during the campaign, but it was very much superficial. Analysts here say she still has the same program. She's still anti-immigration, anti-Islam, and concerned about the national identity. There will be a candidates debate between the two rounds. Macron is sure to bring those up, and also her strong allies with Russia. She still says the war that Putin should be an ally for France. Anne-Marie?
Elaine, we are watching. Thank you very much. Well, in a stunning turn of events, Elon Musk will not be joining Twitter's board. This comes despite the richest man in the world buying more than 9% of a stake in the social media company. We're going to have all the latest details on that coming up. And coming up later on Red and Blue, Anthony Salvanto digs into new polling about the U.S. strategy in Ukraine. You can stream that conversation tonight in our 6 o'clock Eastern hour. We will be right back.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
Some Republicans are now accusing companies like Twitter and Facebook of targeting conservatives.
They've had unchecked power to censor.
I do not have access to my main Facebook account.
I wasn't given an explanation. I was just like, what did I do?
It's not okay to shut down my voice simply because it's not the same as yours.
How those rules are enforced is something that the rest of us know very, very little about.
The First Amendment protects all of us from the government limiting our speech. The companies have the ability to decide what speech they will allow. They're not the government.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
Oh my God, the truck is sinking.
Devastating flooding has reached catastrophic levels.
Rising sea levels are threatening America's coasts.
You would have to take that house and put it on stilts 10 feet tall. If the street is filled with salt water, what difference does it make how high you make your house?
The highest rental rates is exactly where the elevation is highest.
This was the evidence to prove that carbon gentrification was real.
Pay $1,800 in 5 days or you have to leave. Were you scared?
Yes.
Every single person who stood up and said, I am not paying this rent increase, received an eviction.
Haitians built this place and you're getting kicked out.
Yes.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yes.
We found it.
You're kidding me?
We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
The COVID economic shutdown hit Las Vegas harder than any other major city in the nation.
It's decimated the entertainment community.
So even though it looks fairly busy, this is really just a fraction of what business was like prior to COVID.
Last week, there was another large hotel chain that 18,000 were let go.
I haven't seen any jobs that are even close to what I was making.
We're trying to keep things as normal for our kids. I have a 16-year-old daughter and a 12-year-old son.
And I see every day people losing their homes, having to leave Las Vegas.
If I have to start over somewhere else, I have to start over.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
Welcome back to CBS News Mornings. The time now is 7:30. Let's get you caught up on some of the stories you may have missed. The Biden administration is cracking down on so-called ghost guns, with the president gearing up for a major announcement later on today. He's also expected to announce the nomination of Steve Dettelbach to serve as the director of the ATF. The stage is set for a presidential runoff election in France. Emmanuel Macron is set to face far-right candidate Marine Le Pen. And new images have emerged of Russian troops making their way to Ukraine's Donbass region after failing to take Kyiv. Ukraine's president says more support is needed from the U.S. to help hold off Moscow. So part of that request is a demand for another round of weapons from the U.S. and Western allies as Russia pivots to an even deadlier and more destructive assault on the eastern part of Ukraine. So Ed O'Keefe is at the White House now with more on the administration's response. Ed, good morning.
Anne-Marie, good morning. Happy Monday. Great to see you. White House officials continue to defend the level of assistance they've given Ukraine, including equipment given and the hours of phone calls they've had to discuss possible options, as U.S. officials and European allies warn this war is nowhere near over. As Russia regroups and possibly prepares for an even bloodier assault on Ukraine, President Zelensky tells 60 Minutes his country's survival depends on American help.
Unfortunately, I don't have the confidence that we will be receiving everything we need.
The U.S. has sent defensive missiles like Javelins and Stingers, insisting it's providing Ukraine with what it needs to keep fighting.
I spent 2 hours on the phone with the Ukrainian Armed Forces commander and President Zelensky's top advisor, and we went through every single one of their requests.
But the Biden administration's been reluctant to send offensive weapons like planes and tanks for fear of provoking Russia even further. Instead, it's telling European allies to send what they have, and the U.S. will try to replace the weaponry. There's also bipartisan pressure for the White House to do even more.
I think they're getting better, but they still don't understand the goal. The goal is for Ukraine to win.
And despite severe sanctions already, some in Congress say nothing will change until European countries cut off Russia's energy sector.
Every single day that they are continuing to import Russian oil and gas, they're funding Putin's genocide in Ukraine.
India is also a big customer of Russian oil, and that's expected to be a big topic of a virtual conversation later this morning between President Biden and India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi. India is also one of those countries that buys much of its military equipment from Russia, and they've been less punitive than most on the Putin regime, which is also, Anne-Marie, likely to be a subject of the conversation.
Yeah, Ed, India's finding itself sort of under pressure in a variety of areas. We just had a recent sanctions against some diamond mines in Russia. They are major contributors to the diamond industry in India as well. So that being said, including this air defense system that they're buying, has the administration signaled at all how it feels about India's lack of action or response to Russian aggression?
President Biden himself, at least publicly, has been less vocal with the concerns, understanding that as a nuclear power is one that also has to deal with the situation with Pakistan and the fact that for so long it had been buying its military equipment from Russia, that the situation's a little different or that it might take India a little longer to get there. But just in the last few days, they sent a senior national security official of Indian descent to India to meet with government officials there to try to make the case that they've got to join in the sanctioning of Russia. And we'll see after today's conversations, not only between the president and Prime Minister Modi, but also between the Secretary of State and his counterparts, whether India gets any closer to at least sympathizing with, understanding what most of the Western world, most democracies in the world are up to. Remember, India is the largest democracy in the world. They are a nuclear power, so symbolically, certainly, getting them to come on board and join with other countries that are sanctioning the Putin regime, speaking out against the violence, would be a huge step towards making Russia understand how big a deal this is.
In the meantime, we're learning about a bit of a shakeup at the top in regards to commanders and Russian commanders. There's a brand new Russian commander taking over the Ukraine war. Any response from the White House at all on this news?
I mean, not officially, because they continue to say, look, what Russia's doing is a war crime, is unjustified, is violent, and they don't really care who's in charge because this thing is still happening regardless. He is known to American officials because of his involvement in the conflict in Syria. They're obviously concerned that this means things could get better organized, at least in the eastern part of the country. And remember, you've heard experts in recent days, European allies, Ukrainian officials, Americans all say that if Russia's going to reposition and focus on trying to take over the eastern part of that country, a far more wide open rural area where more conventional military equipment like tanks can be used to literally roll in through communities and make it harder for the guerrilla style use of or tactics of Ukrainian forces to stop them, that could mean Russia makes some big gains in the coming weeks as that offensive begins. So whether that has to do with the new general or not, it's just another reminder that this is not a conflict that's expected to wrap up anytime soon.
So quickly, before I let you go, a domestic issue, these ghost guns. You know, the administration has tried to make some headway when it comes to gun control. Not an easy thing to do from the president's office, right? You need Congress's support. So we are going to hear some announcements, though, on cracking down on ghost guns. These are these guns that they don't have serial numbers, so they're untraceable.
Right. So, among other things, what they're announcing today is the Justice Department is going to require that commercial companies that make ghost guns put a serial number on them. White House argues that this is constitutional. It can be done through executive authorities by the President and the Justice Department, but that just like conventional firearms, they're now going to require a serial number. The other thing the President's doing to continue his, at least the political push here on gun control, is he's nominating somebody else to run the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. His name is Steve Dettelbach. He's a former U.S. attorney from the Northern District of Ohio, so the Cleveland area. He ran unsuccessfully for Attorney General in Ohio a few years back and pushed for a ban on assault weapons and universal background checks, things that the President and this administration and many Democrats on Capitol Hill support. But of course, as you said, through all these years, nothing significant has been done in the legislative way regarding gun control, which is why today the President's making this announcement. And you may remember, we talked about this almost exactly a year ago. He told the Justice Department to go figure out what can we do through executive authority alone, and this is what they're coming back with. Go after the manufacture and the commercial sale of ghost guns. But remember, you're going to hear from police chiefs today and other law enforcement experts that say, great that you're doing that, but given that it's so easy to make these 3D printable guns, there's instructions on how to do so online. Okay, if you're going to make it so that commercial ones have to have them, that means a lot of people probably who want these kinds of weapons are going to go out and figure out how to make it on their own or do some kind of informal sale. And that's always been the trickiest part of gun distribution and gun violence, is tracking the informal sector that sells and distributes these weapons.
Yeah, it really is remarkable. You can literally print these things up using plastic, and they are just as deadly as a gun that you would buy in a store. Ed, thank you very much.
Take care.
Some Americans are finally seeing a little relief at the pump. A little. Something's better than nothing. We're going to have more on what's driving, if you will, that dip. That's coming up next. Plus, a closer look at airlines pushing to end mask mandates. That's ahead in our Money Watch segment. And a programming note for you. Tomorrow morning on Here Comes the Sun, Sandra Bullock talks about fame, food, and motherhood.
You know, my children are black. I have a level of defense that millions of mothers have that aren't white. You know, I have an understanding of how scary it is, and I just get really emotional because I think of hundreds of years of women who've never been able to relax into motherhood. They've never been able to relax.
Worried about their kids.
Yes, in a way that we as white women have not had to worry.
You can hear more of Sandra Bullock's candid conversation tomorrow morning on Here Comes the Sun. The show streams at 6:30 Eastern. We'll be right back.
an original CBS Reports documentary.
Some Republicans are now accusing companies like Twitter and Facebook of targeting conservatives.
They've had unchecked power to censor.
I do not have access to my main Facebook account.
I wasn't given an explanation. I was just like, what did I do?
It's not okay to shut down my voice simply because it's not the same as yours.
How those rules are enforced is something that the rest of us know very, very little about.
The First Amendment protects all of us from the government limiting our speech. The companies have the ability to decide what speech they will allow. They're not the government.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
Oh my God, the truck is sinking.
Devastating flooding has reached catastrophic levels.
Rising sea levels are threatening America's coasts.
You would have to take that house and put it on stilts 10 feet tall. If the street is filled with salt water, what difference does it make how high you make your house?
The highest rental rates is exactly where the elevation is highest.
This was the evidence to prove that climate gentrification was real.
Pay $1,800 in 5 days or you have to leave. Were you scared?
Yes.
Every single person who stood up and said, I am not paying this rent increase, received an eviction.
Haitians built this place and you're getting kicked out.
Yes.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yeah. We found it.
You're kidding me?
We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
The COVID economic shutdown hit Las Vegas harder than any other major city in the nation.
It's decimated the entertainment community.
So even though it looks fairly busy, this is really just a fraction of what business was like prior to COVID.
Last week, there was another large hotel chain that 18,000 were let go.
I haven't seen any jobs that are even close to what I was making.
We're trying to keep things as normal for our kids. I have a 16-year-old daughter and a 12-year-old son.
And I see every day people losing their homes, having to leave Las Vegas.
If I have to start over somewhere else, I have to start over.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
It is 7:42, and this is a live look at New York's Times Square, home of CBS Mornings. Tony DeCopel is standing by with a preview of the show. Tony, good morning.
Hey, good morning, Anne Marie. Ahead on CBS Mornings, a rare in-person wartime interview with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who let 60 Minutes into his fortified war rooms to talk about his blunt criticism of NATO and what victory would look like to him. Also, COVID cases are ticking up in some parts of the country. We'll talk with Dr. Ashish Jha about his new role in the Biden administration and whether he thinks we should reinstate mask mandates. And the indie pop band Lucius is back with a new disco album. Anthony talks with them about stepping out of their comfort zone and working with Grammy winner Brandi Carlile. We'll see you at 8.
Well, in a stunning reversal, Elon Musk will not be joining the Twitter board after all. The Tesla CEO and richest man in the world just became the social media company's largest stakeholder after buying 73.5 million shares and was set to officially join the board on Saturday. However, it's unclear why Musk decided to opt out. If you are looking for a job in London, Heathrow Airport is hiring. Boy, are they. It's adding 12,000 new employees as the airport prepares for pre-pandemic levels of travel this summer. In March alone, more than 4 million people passed through the airport. And finally, some good news at the pump. Prices have dropped 10 cents over the past 2 weeks. This morning, the average price of gas in the U.S. is $4.11 a gallon. That is down over 20 cents from a month ago, but still $1.25 more than this time last year. And masks are still required on U.S. flights until next week when the federal mandate expires. However, that is not stopping several states, pilots, and flight attendants from suing the government. Meanwhile, several airlines in Europe have already dropped the requirement, but the move has triggered chaos, with many of those carriers canceling flights because of sick employees. So Money Watch reporter Megan Cirillo has been following this story for us, and she joins us this morning to talk about it. Good morning, Megan. So what is the extent of these canceled flights overseas?
Good morning. So as soon as these restrictions were dropped in the UK, a lot of airlines were quick to also drop their mask rules on airlines, believing that it would encourage more passengers to fly. So EasyJet, for example, is a budget-friendly Swiss carrier, last month said that passengers could fly without masks. And the week before last, they had to cancel a number of flights, more than 200 flights coming out of London. And they attributed those cancellations directly to higher than usual levels of personnel, of crew members testing positive for COVID-19. So it wasn't actually good for business like they anticipated that the loosening of these restrictions would be.
Good for business, good for public health, right? So here's the next question. What do airline CEOs think is the relationship between loosening these restrictions and the public's willingness to fly versus what do epidemiologists say about loosening the restrictions now?
So you and I discussed this before. The CEOs of the major U.S. airlines petitioned the White House to drop the federal rule that requires passengers to wear masks. They want to drop mandatory testing because they believe those measures will encourage the public to fly. They believe that if masks are no longer required on flights, that will signal to the public that this is a safe activity. But epidemiologists aren't so sure. They suggest that the loosening of restrictions, the dropping of mask mandates, for example, will discourage many people, particularly those who are vulnerable, who are elderly, or maybe who have kids who aren't yet vaccinated from flying because they could deem it too risky an activity. And one epidemiologist and health economist said that these recent cancellations were really predictable, that as soon as these people took off their masks, the number of COVID-19 cases started to rise. Too many employees got sick, and then airlines had to cancel hundreds of flights, both last minute due to personnel testing positive for COVID-19 and preemptively to give customers some warning because they anticipated more crew members testing out of work. So not actually as good for business as they thought it would be.
Yeah, tell me about it. Well, the mask mandate is going to be dropped here in the U.S. next week. My advice, not that I'm, the person to give advice, but perhaps investing in travel insurance might be, a worthwhile endeavor. Megan, thank you so much.
Thanks, Anne-Marie.
We are following all of the action out of Augusta, where one American is swinging into the history books after winning the Masters, while another redefines what it means to clinch a victory. We'll have all the highlights coming up next. Until then, we're going to take a quick break, which means you have about 3 minutes or so to download the free CBS News app on all your devices. Our app gives you the best of CBS News all in one place. We'll be right back.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
Some Republicans are now accusing companies like Twitter and Facebook of targeting conservatives.
They've had unchecked power to censor.
I do not have access to my main Facebook account.
I wasn't given an explanation. I was just like, what did I do?
It's not okay to shut down my voice simply because it's not the same as yours.
How those rules are enforced is something that the rest of us know very, very little about.
The First Amendment protects all of us from the government limiting our speech. The companies have the ability to decide what speech they will allow. They're not the government.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
Oh my God, the truck is sinking.
Devastating flooding has reached catastrophic levels.
Rising sea levels are threatening America's coasts.
You would have to take that house and put it on stilts 10 feet tall. If the street is filled with salt water, what difference does it make how high you make your house?
the highest rental rates is exactly where the elevation is highest.
This was the evidence to prove that carbon gentrification was real.
Pay $1,800 in 5 days or you have to leave. Were you scared?
Yes.
Every single person who stood up and said, I am not paying this rent increase, received an eviction.
Haitians built this place and you're getting kicked out.
Yes.
An original CBS Reports documentary streaming now.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yeah. We found it.
You're kidding me!
We got it. We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
The COVID economic shutdown hit Las Vegas harder than any other major city in the nation.
It's decimated the entertainment community.
So even though it looks fairly busy, this is really just a fraction of what business was like prior to COVID.
Last week, there was another large hotel chain that 18,000 were let go.
I haven't seen any jobs that are even close to what I was making.
We're trying to keep things as normal for our kids. I have a 16-year-old daughter and a 12-year-old son.
And I see every day people losing their homes, having to leave Las Vegas.
If I have to start over somewhere else, I have to start over.
An original CBS Reports documentary streaming now.
Well, a new round of severe weather is threatening parts of the plains and the south. So for more on this, let's bring in meteorologist Jordan Steele from our partners at the Weather Channel. Jordan, what is causing this pattern?
Well, Anne-Marie, we're going to throw a little bit of everything at us this week. Big winter storm, big severe weather event. Could we be looking at a flood potential yet again? Another active week, to say the least. Let's talk about the severe weather component because this could be life-threatening, and it's a multi-day severe weather event. We're going to put the bullseye in the southern plains and the central plains, as you can see, kind of stretching all the way up into the Great Lakes as we progress through the week. And in fact, we could be looking at our Torcon values, which today is a 4 around northern Arkansas, but those numbers might jump as the week progresses. I think more importantly, what folks need to realize is when we get these big thunderstorms to brew, we could be looking at very strong updrafts, which could consist of large hail. Think golf ball size or hen egg size. Get your car in the garage or in the carport because it's going to be one of those events where that hail is going to do some damage. Here's the timing. This morning, showers and thunderstorms have been kind of hitting the Paducah area early on. That will continue, but this afternoon, now we bring in the instability. See this little isolated storm developing around Fort Smith? This is going to be the powerful thunderstorms that could produce the tornado and produce the big hail. That's going to head towards Little Rock during the overnight hours tonight. And Dallas, your forecast is so tricky. You have a cap or a lid on the atmosphere. If that decides to pop today, you could see thunderstorms develop in your neck of the woods as well. So just keep your head on a swivel. You got a big question mark on whether that'll happen in the Dallas area. We know we're going to see more storms into tomorrow for North Texas, East Texas, stretching all the way up into the Des Moines area where our Torcon value jumps to 5, and we'll be looking at a line of storms there. But on this northern tier, we're looking at a big snowstorm. We're talking Winter Storm Silas, and I think the bullseye is going to be Bismarck. We're talking 1 to 2 feet of snowfall. I-94 is going to be problematic to drive on all week long, as that snow will be puking heavy snowfall rates, which we also have to talk about the wind component because we could be looking at blizzard conditions. In fact, blizzard warnings are already up for you guys to get you guys prepped for that. But just know this winter storm is going to be no joke as well. And Anne-Marie, you guys can catch coverage of Winter Storm Silas and, of course, that severe weather threat, including our virtual view technology all day long on the Weather Channel television network.
All right, Jordan Steele, thank you so much. You can also get the latest on the weather in your area on the CBS News app. It gives you access to all of our CBS News national and local streams for free, anytime, anywhere. Well, Scottie Scheffler is probably still celebrating his epic win at the Masters over the weekend, while Tiger Woods made his return to the golfing world stage. And this comes about 14 months after his horrific car crash. Jim Axelrod has all the highlights.
The drama built over the first couple holes as Scottie Scheffler's 3-stroke lead was cut to 1.
17 birdies on the week. Let's make it 18.
And just as it looked it might get even closer, Scheffler shut the door with a spectacular chip. on the third hole.
Honestly, having that one go in was such a surprise. I didn't really know how to react. I was just trying to get up there somewhere near the hole, and to have that one go in was definitely, a fortunate break.
No one would get closer than 3 strokes the rest of the day, and Scheffler lived his childhood dream of walking up the 18th fairway at Augusta National, a Masters champion.
How did the idea, the fantasy of the walk down 18 match up to the reality?
It went by a lot quicker in reality than it did in my dreams. In my dreams, I got to enjoy it for about 10 minutes, but in reality, it's only about 20 seconds.
The 25-year-old from Dallas had never won on the PGA Tour until February. He's now won 4 times in the last 8 weeks and become the world's #1 ranked golfer in record time.
Last couple of months, it feels like some switch has flipped in your golfing life. What's happened?
If I knew, I would I would let you know, but I really don't. Once you're able to be in that environment and know what it feels like, and you know how you feel in that environment, you're able to practice and prepare for those moments.
As for Tiger, he finished off his magical week with a warm ovation at the 18th green, and then said he felt good enough that he plans to play the British Open at St. Andrews this summer.
A month ago, I didn't know if I could pull this off. I think it was a positive, and I've got some work to do, and looking forward to it.
Look at that smile. All right, the time now is 7:55. Here's a look at what is coming up today. We are keeping an eye on an extremely high-profile trial starting today. Actor Johnny Depp has sued the Washington Post for defamation after the paper published an op-ed by his ex-wife, Amber Heard. So that's scheduled to begin at 10 a.m. Eastern. President Biden and India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi will meet virtually later on this morning. They're expected to discuss the Ukraine war and global economic ties. That is set for 11 a.m. Eastern. Later on this afternoon, the Biden administration is set to announce new measures to fight gun crime. Officials are expected to take aim at so-called ghost guns, which are unregulated and untraceable weapons. You can stream that right here at 2:15 Eastern. Before all of that, a top UN official joins us from Ukraine, where efforts are underway nationwide to combat the growing humanitarian crisis. This comes as Russian airstrikes and ground attacks force millions to flee their homes. You can stream that at around 9 a.m. Eastern. If you are heading out the door, take us with you. You can access all of our CBS News national and local streams for free anytime, anywhere on the CBS News app. CBS Mornings is next, and I will see you in an hour.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
Some Republicans are now accusing companies like Twitter and Facebook of targeting conservatives.
They've had unchecked power to censor.
I do not have access to my main Facebook account.
I wasn't given an explanation. I was just like, what did I do? It's not okay to shut down my voice simply because it's not the same as yours.
How those rules are enforced is something that the rest of us know very, very little about.
The First Amendment protects all of us from the government limiting our speech. The companies have the ability to decide what speech they will allow. They're not the government.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yes. We found it.
You're kidding me!
We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform, inspire, and brighten your day.
I've been waiting patiently for something like this.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream on the free CBS News app Tuesday mornings.
People from every corner of America facing challenges.
Everyone is just looking for some type of connection.
Just raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to help.
Coming together to find solutions.
We are going to do something about it.
Their stories are our stories.
Welcome to Eye on America.
Stream now on the free CBS News app. An original CBS Reports documentary.
There is now more than $1.7 trillion in student loan debt.
The punishing price of a college education.
Why are we punishing millions of people because they chose to get an education?
My parents didn't make enough to just write a check and pay for school, and so loans were really my only option.
It just feels like quicksand. It feels like this huge thing I'll never get out from under.
This would be a moment for the federal government to say it is time for us not only to ask for forgiveness, but to extend forgiveness.
There's a cost to forgiveness. Ultimately, taxpayers are responsible for the federal debt.
An original CBS Reports documentary streaming now.
This week on 60 Minutes, that's incredible.
The 60 Minutes.
60 Minutes, 60 Minutes.
Are you ready for some tough questions? Let me ask you this.
You know how this sounds.
What's your response to that?
60 Minutes Sundays on CBS.
Welcome to CBS Mornings on this Monday. I'm Gail King.
I'm Tony DeCopel.
And I'm Vladimir Duthier.
Nate is off, but we're in good hands. Let's go to today's Eye Opener. It's your world in 90 seconds.
We think this will be a new wave of this war. We don't know how much Russian weaponry there will be, but we understand there'll be many times more than there is now.
President Zelensky tells 60 Minutes his country's fate depends on the West as Russia prepares another offensive.
COVID cases rise again in some parts of the country. What's fueling the latest surge?
And I think that we're dramatically undercounting cases. There's probably close to 250,000 infections a day.
The Biden administration is expected to unveil its long-awaited rules today to crack down on so-called ghost guns.
Another mass shooting, this time in Iowa. At least 2 people are dead and 10 others injured.
We believe that there was more than one shooter.
Florida Highway Patrol are investigating the death of Steelers quarterback Dwayne Haskins.
Police say a dump truck struck Haskins.
The Bennifer comeback is stronger than ever. Jennifer Lopez and Ben Affleck are engaged for the second time.
And it was a Masters for the ages. We've got all the highlights from a historic championship weekend in Augusta.
Scheffler outshines them all.